Hey, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, Adrian here for Digital Dojos, and this is my other office. This is the office for the IT consulting company that I co-founded and am a part of, and more specifically, this is my desk. This is the MacBook that I mainly operate off of when I'm mobile, and this is the Mac Studio that runs my entire desk setup. So I have two Apple Studio monitors here and an LG 4K that's in a vertical position. And this has pretty much been my primary desk setup for the better part of the year. That is until today, and a delivery that will be coming to replace this Mac Studio. So with the recent release and update to the Mac Mini, I decided to pull the trigger on an M4 Pro, M4 Max, whatever they're calling it nowadays, and upgrade my main desktop PC or Mac here at the office. I got the Mac Studio when it first came out, originally as an editing machine for back home, for the actual studio, and I liked it so much that I ended up putting a desktop here in the office and never looked back. So I'm looking forward to swapping out the Mac Studio today when that gets delivered. I think I am going to have to get a couple accessories or adapters to adjust for just some of the USB devices I have on my desk versus USB-C. And eventually I'll have to get some sort of under desk mount to accommodate, unless I end up liking it on the desk, given how small the footprint is nowadays. So I guess with that, all I got to do is, wait for it to be delivered.
So I've just one delivery.
Okay, so many hours later, delivery did not come to like end of day, like 5 p.m. and I was like in a meeting for all the latter half of the day, but we got it. The Mac Mini arrived with the M4 Pro chip. So this is again that base model M4 Pro, sorry, I should say the base M4 Pro model. So M4 Pro chip, 512 gigs of storage space and 24 gigs of RAM. I could have gone with a bigger hard drive, but I decided, since this is the device I'm going to be using mostly at the office, I don't have too much local data that I'm concerned about, right? I'm not editing videos on this or anything like that, so a lot of my stuff for work is mostly cloud-based, so 512 should be more than enough. I did want that 24 gigs of RAM, that 16-core GPU, 12-core CPU, just for that extra power, and of course, with this, you get the Thunderbolt 5 port, so we'll be able to take advantage of that. Also, speaking of hard drive, for the future, if I ever do decide to upgrade this, from what I've seen, apparently, if you have the skill set, you can indeed update the NAND chips and the storage space, from what I've seen online. So that will be a much longer future sort of thing. Okay, so here we are at the office or home office slash studio setup for the computer that will be for my office setup here, and let's go ahead and unbox and start to get this set up. So you can see here's the box for reference. Super simple, typical Apple packaging. We're just going to remove the two kind of pull tabs here, these adhesives, and that should allow us to lift up the box here and straight to it. I mean, in very typical Apple fashion here, you have the Mac Mini front and center, and here it is. And don't get me wrong, it is much tinier than the previous gen Mac Minis in terms of footprint. It is a little bit taller and thicker than it may look like. A lot of people associate this to like an Apple TV, if not a shrunken Mac Studio, and for sure it's definitely more akin to a shrunken Mac Studio, but this is definitely a little bit bigger in size, and we'll do that size comparison in just a second here. Outside of that, you just get the power cable, and that's it. You get this designed by Apple in California, but I believe nowadays this is just like paperwork. I don't even think this is like a logo anymore or sticker. Yeah, it's just straight up like manual sort of deal. So now, no accessories here. We just got the computer, since that's the whole appeal of a Mac Mini. You can bring your own hardware, accessories, etc. So let's go ahead and peel that classic peel here, and we'll get the mic for the ASMR. Oops. And there you have it. I mean, that is all there is to it. here you have the Mac Mini in its aluminum chassis. You have that Apple logo up top that already has some fingerprint smudge on it there. I need my Apple cleaning cloth to remove that. You have your 2 front-facing USB-C ports, and then this is, I believe, the 3.5 millimeter audio jack, so you still have that. Now, unlike something like the Mac Studio, you do not have an SD card, but you just have your standard 2 front USB-C ports. You have an indicator light there for power. Speaking of power, the controversial thing about this, the power button is indeed on the bottom. So it's right there located at the bottom, which obviously if your computer is sitting like this on a desktop is pretty inconvenient to access. You have to lift the Mac up a little bit. For myself, I'm going to be mounting this under a desk most likely, so it'll be convenient in my case. A lot of people talked about this. A lot of people said, like, why wasn't it in the front? Why didn't they just figure a way to make the Apple logo the button? Truthfully, for somebody like myself, I rarely ever shut down my desktop, especially my Mac desktop. My Mac Studio is practically always on. I lock it and have it go to sleep or when I run updates. But outside of that, I'm never fidgeting with the power button as much. But I get it, it still doesn't excuse the fact that it is in a weird, inconvenient spot a la Magic Mouse. Now, on the back here, as far as I/O goes, you do have your power cable right here. You have your Ethernet cable. In this case, it's just a standard Ethernet gigabit. You have your HDMI port, and then you have 3, in this case, Thunderbolt 5 ports. So this should support up to multiple displays. In my case, I should be able to use, I'm assuming, 2 of these plus an HDMI port, but we'll have to test that when I bring it back to the office. But that's it. The I/O is pretty simplified there. And then you have your all-in-one both fan and vent, or just kind of cooling system. So the overall design is super, super simplified here. Really small footprint. And if you've ever seen the internals of these things, or see the people who've done teardowns already, they've done a tremendous job in packing a lot of hardware in here. Not to mention like the power supply in itself, the PSU that's integrated in here. Just a real great marvel of engineering. Now, to give you some kind of real-world examples here, we have the Mac Mini. Here is an Apple TV 4K that I have, and this is like what a lot of people were talking about in terms of design language, and that's fair because look at it. The footprint is nearly the same, minus a little fan vent at the bottom there, but very similar aesthetics. I mean, side by side, these things pretty much have the same kind of rounded form factor, but just to give you a size comparison, that's how much bigger the the Mac Mini is. And then in terms of thickness here, you can kind of see the profile side by side when they're lined up. Because if you compare it to some of the Mac Minis from previous generations, which I also happen to have here, you have generations like these older models here that were pretty much the same design language throughout in terms of overall size. And now the Mac Mini is looking much more, mini. And if we stack it on top here, you can see, just for reference here, and then we'll do the same comparison, 18 if not older, this model, you can kind of see the size comparison. So the older minis are definitely thinner, but just a much bigger overall footprint. So again, just a comparison of the I/O side by side with an older Mac Mini. And then, speaking of old Mac Minis, to kind of take it back, here we have one of the OG Mac Minis. And you can see here, again, size comparison, how far we've come. This was the one that kind of kicked it all off here in that older form factor, one of the ones that kicked it all off. And you can see here just the form factor over the years. So let's stack it all up here. So one of the previous models, one of the OG models, and now the newest model. So again, just overall comparisons. This is a hefty stack. You have multiple generations here of Mac Mini. And then the most akin thing I want to compare it to also is just like a Mini or Intel NUC. So on the Windows side, you can see here side profiles of an Intel NUC, which is a very popular PC kind of small form factor build, in comparison to the Mac Mini, which technically has a smaller footprint, but when you're looking at build quality and pure specs of something like this Mac Mini definitely packs a punch for what you get it at. And again, being one of now the most cheapest Macs that you can get, and still being one of the most powerful Macs you can get. Okay, so I have my capture card hooked up here, and I'm gonna boot up the Mac Mini, got it all connected. And here's like the blessing and curse of things like all USB-C. See, I want to hook up this Logitech keyboard because it's convenient for setting up stuff like this because it's a keyboard and trackpad, but it's a USB receiver. Technically, you can do it over Bluetooth, I guess, but the ease of just being able to plug this in, I had to get my USB to USB-C adapter so I can plug it in the front here. But again, a lot of my devices have moved over to USB-C, but it is just one of those things that you have to be mindful of. So let's go ahead and get the device booted here for the first time. Has a built-in speaker. You hear that Apple bong there, and HDCP is active. Did not anticipate that. This is not a reflection of the Mac Mini. This is like technology built to prevent you from pirating content, essentially. Okay, so HDCP issue figured out. Apparently, if I run, technically it was going from my RetroTink to my Elgato capture card. If I go direct into the Elgato, no issue. So that was kind of throwing me for a loop there. Okay, so here's our build for Geekbench. Here's our CPU. We have that M4 Pro, 24 gigs of RAM, and then we have that M4 Pro 16 cores for the GPU. So let's go ahead and run that CPU benchmark. Okay, so a couple minutes later, here we have it. This is the single core score, 3,947, with a multi-core score of 20,562. And you can see some of the more kind of details here throughout. And let me just kind of scroll down on the single core performance, multi-core performance. You see a lot of that benefit of that M4 Pro, which is just kind of insane. Here's a comparison that is a little bit more fair. A Mac Mini from 2023. This is an M2 Pro based Mac Mini, 3.4 gigahertz, one processor, 10 cores, versus the M4 Pro, so 2 generations newer that we have here. And you can see it's a 67% difference in in single core, and a 61% difference in multi-core score. So coming off of just like the more recent Mac Minis, definitely a bump. And obviously this isn't complete, all pun intended, apples to apples, but gives you an idea at least. For those who are curious, we're going to run Cinebench 2024 here on the GPU and CPU side as well. Forgot how long Cinebench takes, but on the GPU side, we have a score of 7,749. You can kind of see how it compares to some of the other Apple-related GPUs here and just general specs here. So here we have the multi-core scores scored in at 1,431. So interesting here, you can see the kind of comparison to some other systems. The M1 Ultra in this case, at least this specific system, did score higher, it looks like. I mean, an overall score here, right above an Intel Xeon here at 1579. And for the final score, the benchmarks, nearly 30 minutes later, 174 on CPU single core performance in Cinebench, specifically where we ranked number 1, at least in the rankings of comparison chart here. So compared to an M1 Max, M1 Ultra, looks like a standard M1 and various other CPUs, scoring pretty significantly here at 174. And for what it's worth, while this is running the Cinebench CPU score right now, the fan has kicked in, so it's kind of audible. You can hear it here. Then the Mac Mini is a little bit warmer to the touch, but again, I've been running benchmarks on this for the last like 30 minutes. But if I get the microphone a little closer here, you can probably hear that fan that's kicking in that's underneath. So it's that singular vent and exhaust port. I imagine if this is, alongside ambient noise, it isn't terribly noisy or loud, but given it's right next to me right now, I do hear it and just kind of want to note. But again, expected when you're running things like benchmarks. So look, all in all, this was never intended to be a review. I'm going to have to spend time with it to actually, fully test it out and get a feel for it in my day-to-day workflow. This was meant for me to upgrade my work desktop and main Mac. I'm not going to be using this for gaming. I'm not going to be using this for like heavy rendering tasks like major video editing like I would do here at the home office or studio. But it's probably a little overkill for what I do on a day-to-day basis. But if you know anything about me, I'd rather go on the higher end of the spectrum than on the lower end and have that, headway as time goes on. But all in all, I'm really excited about this. And I think for things like a desktop Mac, even though it's all like USB-C now, which is great with the Thunderbolt 5, once I get my adapters and hubs and docks or whatever it is all set in place, the thing about a desktop PC is you're not generally moving it or adjusting it all that much. So once I get it integrated at my setup at the office, it should just be kind of set and good to go. And review aside, I don't really have to, test it that much to say right now in its current state of the Mac lineup, if you're looking for a Mac desktop and you want great value, bang for your buck, you want something that has a, decent amount of horsepower, or you can get it even at the base model. You're looking just to get an affordable Mac and you have the accessories, you have the keyboard, the mouse, the monitor setup, then the Mac Mini arguably is one of the best values, not just in the Mac lineup, but in computing in general for what you get in its small but mighty form factor. So if you're looking to get into the Mac ecosystem, you're looking to upgrade, and you want specifically, obviously, a desktop Mac, then this could be for your consideration. And given the form factor and size, in all honesty, you can almost be considered a portable Mac at that. So hope you enjoyed this unboxing and first look at Apple's newest Mac Mini. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. Consider subscribing for more content to come in the future. And as always, thanks for watching.